Welcome to this conference hosted by MS Focus, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. I'm your host, Kimani Hendricks, Multimedia Communications Coordinator for MS Focus, and I'm joined by Cherie Benz, who will discuss aging with MS. After a presentation, we will allow time for questions and comments. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Cherie Benz is a registered nurse with an additional degree in gerontology and is also an internationally certified multiple sclerosis nurse. She is a regular presenter of patient education programs for MS Focus and a writer of MS Focus magazine. Cherie was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis in 1994 and has found that adopting some changes in her lifestyle has made her MS much more easy to manage. We're pleased to have her join us to present this important topic. Cherie, thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kamani. Nice to see some familiar faces out there and some familiar names, and I see my little sister is also on the call. So welcome, everybody. I wanted to just take some time today and talk to you about some normal changes in aging that everybody can expect to experience, and then talk a little bit about biological age versus chronological age, and finally go into how the aging process might be altered by MS or MS altered by the aging process. So normal aging, all of us can expect to start what we call an aging process that's somewhat noticeable by our mid-40s or early 50s. For many of us, that's the time that hormone levels begin to ramp down, and they certainly do play a major role in the outward signs of aging for all of us. Muscle mass is diminished. Skin loses its elasticity, kind of gets creepy, as you can see here. There are pigment changes. We may see something called age spots, and that's just the melanin in our skin that's just sort of clumping. Eyes may even lighten in color. My eyes used to be very, very, very dark brown, and now in bright sunlight, they almost look amber. So if you've ever noticed, some very, very old people, particularly those with blue eyes, will end up almost with a really, really pale blue eye that may have been very, very blue when they were younger. People with green eyes may turn to gray. So those things tend to ramp down. Now, what we're hearing in the research on aging, just general aging, not necessarily aging with a chronic illness or MS, is something that is called biological aging. Now, chronological aging is what we consider our birthday, the age that we have been on this earth. That's our chronological age. Biological age, however, can be very different. And if you ever want to figure out your biological age, just type in biological age into your search bar, and it will bring up a calculator that's a real quick, like 2-minute quiz that asks you questions on the year that you were born, your gender, do you eat breakfast every day? How many hours of sleep do you normally get a night? And it goes through those sorts of things that may impact your sense of well-being. Things like relationships that are solid, good, fulfilling. Do you enjoy your vocation? Do you have a circle of friends you can count on? How many servings of fruits and vegetables are you eating a day? How much activity do you do during the day? Do you do weight-bearing exercises? All of those things go into calculating an age. Now, the first time I did the survey, I sort of fudged on the answers. I said, oh yeah, I do like 30 minutes of exercise every day. Well, not really. But so go through and answer the way you think you'd like to be, and then go through again and answer really honestly for what you're doing. I honestly answered that survey this morning, and I come out at age 46 biologically. I'll be 68 in about 7 weeks. So I think, you know, certainly lifestyle changes, as Kamani mentioned, can make a big, big difference. Back in 2001, when I went on my first disease-modifying therapy, I was scooter dependent. I wasn't walking more than maybe 25 or 50 feet, and that with canes or on the arm of somebody. And now it is not a big deal for me to walk for a mile in the evening if it's not too hot. If it's too hot, I try to get my exercise in other ways. So just as long as you're aware that moving is important. Biological age also takes into account things like smoking. People who smoke age at a much more rapid rate physiologically than those who do not. So smoking is also worsens your MS. People who smoke that have MS progress at a rate more than double that of non-smokers. So I would just ask you to very honestly look at that. If you're able to go online and do your biological age mark out and see if there aren't things that you look at that you see that you can change in your own life. Alcohol consumption is another thing that's looked at. How many servings of fruits or vegetables? Somebody is not on mute. If you're not on mute, I would ask right now that you do that if you could. Thank you very, very much. The biological age survey, I see Christy is asking. I just mentioned, Christy, that if you go into your search bar on the internet and type in biological age, there are several different calculators out there. Biological-age.com is where I got the 2-minute survey that I'm mentioning right now. So now, MS and aging. Let's just talk a little bit about how our MS impacts our aging. Most of us who have MS don't just have MS, we have something else in addition to that. And as we get older, we add other conditions often, and they're called comorbidities, meaning that they exist together or in conjunction with other things that are going on in our bodies. For me, it's multiple sclerosis. Also, I come from a family where obesity is a problem. So I've got obesity added to that. I'm actually not obese anymore, but I'm very overweight. And that has taken place over a period of years of changing my lifestyle. High blood pressure is another one that many of us often experience, as is diabetes. And it seems like for people with MS, particularly those of us who've been on some of the disease-modifying therapies, we might have also hypothyroidism, which can contribute to the obesity and maybe even the diabetes. So all of those things may be needing to be treated at some point, and the treatments that affect one condition may impact another. For example, when you have a relapse, you may be treated with steroids or Acthar gel. Those things have a tendency to change your metabolism over time. If you've had a 5-day round of IV steroids, you're probably going to notice at the end of that you've got maybe 10, 15, even 20 pounds extra than when you started. And as that happens, we often don't lose it all. It tends to stay. And that shift in our metabolism makes the weight that comes on harder and harder and harder to lose. So you inch up into the overweight or obese levels where it's more difficult perhaps to exercise. Your fatigue levels are higher. And those are things that if I could go back and turn back the clock and be more aware of it at the time, I might have changed some of the things that I was doing. I don't know about you, but when I'm really fatigued, when I don't have the ability to move as readily or as comfortably as I often do, then I have a tendency to sit more. I have a tendency to eat more. I have a tendency maybe to just plain not move. So all of those things go together to bring us into a place where we're sort of setting the stage for things to pile on top of each other. And some of that is a matter of just making a decision that I'm going to move more. And so one of the things that I've ticked into my schedule that's very simple to do is, if I'm paying bills, for example, I will write out the check, I'll put it in the envelope, I'll get up and I'll walk to the mailbox on the front of the house and then come back and write the next one. Or I will sit for 5 or 10 minutes doing bookkeeping, and then I'll get up and go to the kitchen and get a glass of water, or something like that. So I'm never sitting for more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes at a time throughout the course of a normal day. Obviously, if I'm doing a Zoom meeting like this, or doing an online class, then that's going to not happen to that degree. So just trying to add little bits of activity into your day are helpful to burning those calories and to getting moving. Now, hormones are another thing that I mentioned earlier that really can impact the aging process. Women with MS, we're about 3 women to every man that gets MS. Women tend to progress at a rate that's slower than men, just the natural progression of things. However, once we start lowering our hormone levels, once we start into that perimenopause or menopausal time frame, the way that women are progressing versus the way that men are progressing tends to even out. So by the time we hit about 50, maybe 55, women and men begin to progress at about the same levels, whereas men will progress a little earlier than women do. While our hormone levels as women are dropping, it seems in some of the studies that are smaller that have been done on hormone levels in men that men also drop their hormone levels. And with the drop in hormone levels, their MS may seem to be a little bit more aggressive. So there's still studies going on the impact of hormones and MS. In fact, some of the studies going on right now are looking at whether or not supplementing some hormones earlier on in the course of the disease might be neuroprotective or protect the tissue in our brains and our spinal cords, our central nervous system, from getting damaged as quickly. So just keep your eye on that. The other thing is that with aging, our cells tend to lose what they call sentience, or the ability to reproduce. They reproduce at a much slower rate, which is one of the reasons why as we age, the lesions in our central nervous system tend not to repair themselves. Now, I think people don't really understand that in the normal average person, even the normal average person with multiple sclerosis, as damage takes place in the central nervous system, our bodies tend to repair it. So over time, there's much more repair going on than people are aware of. However, as we age, that repair slows drastically, which is one of the reasons why myelin repair does not seem to be effective the older a person gets. In some of the clinical trials that are going on right now, it looks like there's a small subset of people that seem very, very much more susceptible to repair than others. And that subset is predominantly young males. It's not females, and it's not older persons of either gender. So although the myelin repair is looking like it's working in the animal model, once it's transferred to the human model, we're not seeing that robust repair happening. It's still something that's being tweaked and looked at, so stay tuned for that. Now, brain atrophy is another thing that is a normal part of aging. Again, those cells are not repairing on a regular basis, so our brains begin to shrink a little bit. And almost everybody by the age of 65 has a little bit of brain atrophy. In the MS population, though, that level of atrophy is a little bit higher. Now, when you have an MRI done, you could have that brain atrophy measured, and many of our neurologists are ordering measurements on the brain atrophy. Some of the imaging centers are also putting those measurements in, whether or not it was actually ordered. But if you're dehydrated when you have your MRI, you're more likely to show what appears to be brain atrophy. So be sure that you hydrate well before you go in the machine, keeping in mind that you may need a bathroom break right before you get into the machine if you're doing that. Let's see, people with aging. All right, one of the things with aging individuals is that activity level needs to be kept up. Those who are exercising more, and by exercising, I don't necessarily mean going to the gym and working out. I mean things like carrying the laundry basket, if you're able to do it, full of laundry, or going up and down the stairs if you're able to do them. If you're wheelchair bound, certainly taking something like a soup can or a 1 or 2 pound weight and just doing some curls with it. Just getting your muscles moving. Falls can be prevented, and with those falls being prevented, you're preventing further injury that might cause you to progress even further or to get more dependent on others rather than more independent. So one of the things that we heard at the Consortium of Multiple Sclerosis Centers annual meeting in May, it was a virtual meeting, was that people who exercise regularly end up with a better muscle mass, better core strength, fewer falls, more independent, safer in the home for longer. And what they're recommending now is that you alternate strength training and aerobic type of exercise. So one day you might do your walk, and the next day you might spend 30 minutes, 20 or 30 minutes working different muscle groups with weights. That combination of activity helps to keep our muscles stronger, but also ramps down the fatigue that often comes with exercise. Now, I found when I first started a regular exercise program back in 2006, that I was not able to do a whole lot after about 5 minutes. I just got so fatigued so quickly. I'm very, very heat sensitive, so I found that I did better with exercise if I was wearing a cooling vest or if I was in water rather than something on a mat or standing or on a treadmill or whatever. So if I kept my body cool, I could do more. And gradually, as I worked out, I was able to do more and more. I was able to lengthen the period of exercise, and I was able to actually increase my endurance considerably. When we're out walking now, my husband will occasionally comment, particularly if we're walking up the hill from Main Street to our house, which is about an 80-foot increase in elevation over the course of about 2.5 blocks. He keeps saying, you know, you're just not huffing and puffing like you used to be. Or he would say when I was doing my, when I was first doing my strength training, he'd say, the bottom side of your arm doesn't flop back and forth like it used to. I mean, those are things that each of us like to hear, although necessarily we don't like to hear that somebody's watching our arms flopping. But there's little changes like that that you may not see initially, but somebody else might. So I just encourage you to try what feels normal to you. I just started moving, and what felt good I continued doing, and what didn't feel good I didn't. It's often very, very helpful to have a guide in that. I ask my doctor generally about once a year, maybe once every 1.5 years now that I'm more stable, for a PT evaluation. I can't always see that there's something in my gait that's wrong, but a physical therapist can and give me some tips to correct that. And I've had this happen so many times when that has been corrected, when I'm conscious about the way I move, I feel better, I sleep better. My sense of well-being is improved. Now, as far as diet is concerned, there is no one diet that works well for everyone with MS. Each of us is just a little bit different. Oftentimes people will exclude foods if they're on a specific diet. You tell them, you know, low sugar diet, and people will do away with fruits because there's sugar in fruits. We're not talking about the sugars that naturally occur in our foods. Those are not particularly detrimental unless we overdo, just like overdoing anything can be detrimental. We're talking about at least 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. If they're fresh, even better. You're getting more nutrient from the fresh ones than you are from canned or from frozen or from something that is sat in your refrigerator for a week, is beginning to leach nutrient. And yet those fresh fruits and vegetables give us the fiber that are needed for proper elimination. So you'll find that by increasing the servings of your fresh fruits and vegetables, you'll probably improve constipation. You may even improve bladder problems, because those nutrients are getting to all parts of your body and helping them to be a little bit better functioning. Sugar is probably the greatest inflammatory thing that we put into our bodies. So if you can ramp down the sugars, I'm not saying don't eat dessert, but I'm saying maybe not every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Portion control can be very helpful, and along with all this, you're going to begin to see the weight begin to peel back. In getting my diabetes under control, I began to stabilize the weight gain, and with the weight gain, with that weight gain stabilized, I began to feel a little bit more energetic. So I was doing a little more, and the weight began to melt off. And now for the last 1.5 years, I've been losing an average of about a pound, pound and a half a month. So when you take it off that slowly, it tends to stay off. I'm actually at a lighter weight now than I have been at any time since 2009. So all of those things, those little changes, make big differences in the way that you feel and the way that you function. Whether or not you're eating meat or animal products, those things are a personal preference. There is some evidence in some small studies that diets that are free of animal products for some people tend to improve some of those, what I called comorbidities. So if you're just not sure where to start, it certainly is reasonable to ask your doctor for a referral to a dietitian and get some guidance on what a good, healthy diet looks like, and whether or not you're able to afford that food, what resources are out there if you can't. How can you access the food that you need? Those are questions that there are answers out there for. They may be regionally specific depending upon where you live. So don't hesitate to ask those questions. Social support is very necessary. In this age of COVID, where we tend to be in our homes more than ever before, we often feel isolated. It's not just up to others to come to you. It's also up to you to reach out to others. The telephone's there. In this age of Zoom, all of us have the ability to do FaceTime or a quick Zoom with somebody, or even Skype. The basic Zoom program allows you to do a face-to-face conference with a handful of people for a maximum of 45 minutes. And that can sort of renew and instill a sense of community in you. Financial security is also something that is very, very helpful as we age to reduce stress. I believe we're doing, Kamani, are we doing a financial program webinar coming up in the near future? Or do we just do it?
Sure. Casey, do you know?
I do, yes. We do have an estate planning webinar scheduled. I believe it's August 20th.
Okay.
And if anybody wants information about that, they can reply to their registration email for this conference. It'll come to me and I'll send them the information.
Okay, thank you, Casey and Kamani. I appreciate it. I know that the less we leave to chance, the greater sense of security. We don't have to worry about things that we plan and have in place. It's just one thing that's pulled out of that mix that can pull us down. So the financial planning and the security that brings, you know, if the insurance planning, there are people out there that will counsel you in what insurances to take out. One of the things that I never realized, I was eligible for Medicare back in my early 50s and chose not to take it because I felt like it would restrict some of my options for healthcare. And when our co-pays went up to $2,500 per, not our co-pays, our premiums went up to $2,500 for the two of us per month, I made the decision to go on Medicare. One of the things I didn't really realize at the time was that with Medicare Part D, the co-pays were very high for the disease-modifying therapies. And I found out very quickly that I could no longer really afford the co-pays for my injectable medication. They were over $2,000 a month at that time, and now they're over $3,500 a month. The drug companies are not allowed to help those on Medicare with co-pays. So you either have to make a low enough income, which is it's a very generous income level. I think for a two-person household, it's somewhere around $70,000 a year. So it's very generous. You either have to make little enough money to fall into a bucket that foundations, not-for-profit foundations, can help you with those co-pays. Unfortunately, the monies are not always there. So you might apply for help with that and have people looking for foundation money for you, but certain diseases get funded into those foundations on sort of a rotation. So MS might be once or twice a year that a bunch of money is put in to those foundations for co-pays. But again, as you're doing your financial planning, that's one of the things you might need to look at. Lifestyle changes, I've sort of touched on exercise and eating a little bit, but also things like setting aside a period of every day for you. A time when maybe you can just start out your day or even end your day, or both, just taking stock of what is this body feeling? What is this spirit feeling? Just take some time and feel your breath. Be aware of your heartbeat. Be aware of any tension in your body and just consciously relax that tension. Take just 5 minutes once or twice a day to do that, to touch base with you, to feel you, and to listen to the messages that you are sending to you. Tending your spirit is very important. Whether or not you have a specific faith walk, you are a spiritual being. And if you can nurture that by meeting with like-minded people, or taking advantage of, particularly in this day and age, of all of the options for worship or learning online, just tending that spirit. Volunteering. And right now with COVID, if you're not leaving the house, you can certainly volunteer as a friendly caller. Touch base with people who are like yourself, perhaps shut in. Develop those relationships. Touch base with people that you had not touched base with before. And really cultivate those relationships. It will give you a sense of accomplishment. It will increase your joy. And I encourage you to do those things. Now, for those of you that use NARCOMS and do their twice-a-year surveys, NARCOMS stands for the North American Research Council on MS. They have over 20,000 members that answer surveys for them twice a year. And they put out a quarterly magazine, or I'm sorry, a twice-a-year magazine based on those surveys. And the last magazine that came out had all aging and MS research. So if you want to go to NARCOMS, NARCOMS, search that on the website, and go to their homepage, you can get a free copy of the aging in MS research that's been done. So I think at this point, I'd like to just stop here and see if there are any questions that have come up. Are DMTs still effective? Yes, Janice. Thank you for bringing that up. DMTs, disease-modifying therapies. There is a train of thought out there that since our normal aging shows that MS tends to slow down by about age 55 or 60. That trajectory, that was looked at before we ever had disease-modifying therapies. People with MS had progressed oftentimes by the age of 55 or 60 to the extent that they were going to progress. And then things just quieted down. What we have initially back in the 70s, the MS Society was telling us that 85% of us would be diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS, and perhaps 10 to 15% with primary progressive MS that didn't have relapses, that just progressed right from the start. And that more than 50% of those who had relapsing remitting MS in the beginning would transition to secondary progressive MS after 10 to 15 years. Now, what the research is showing is that it's closer to 25 or 30 years if disease-modifying therapies are started early. For some people, if you have started on a disease-modifying therapy, you haven't had any changes in your MRI, you haven't had any relapses, and you haven't progressed on the EDSS, or the Expanded Disability Scale, then it is thought that after 5 years of that, you may be easily able to come off of a disease-modifying therapy. I did when I was, I think, 59. I came off of a disease-modifying therapy. Hadn't had a relapse in about 3 years, but 7 months later, I had one of the worst relapses I'd ever had. And it took me a good 1.5 years to get that under control and calmed down again. Another 5 years went by, I came off of a disease-modifying therapy again, and the same thing. Within 6 months, another relapse. So there is a section of us there that really don't, but certainly if you want to come off of a disease-modifying therapy for any reason, and you feel like you're stable, have that conversation with your doctor. There is a subset of doctors out there who will automatically not put a person over the age of 55 or 60 on a disease-modifying therapy, or keep them on a disease-modifying therapy, figuring that the damage is already done. I think that that is not a good way to look at it. For me, yes, there is some damage done. I just don't want more damage. And what I'm doing now seems to work well for me. And that conversation is an ongoing conversation. Fortunately, my neurologist is keeping track of my labs, keeping track of any potential problems that could take place as a result of the disease-modifying therapies that I'm on. And we're tracking that together. So I would encourage you to open that dialogue with your doctors. Research is ongoing. There is a clinical trial right now that's ending in 2023 that's looking at people over the age of 55 who are staying on disease-modifying therapies. There are still some people on their disease-modifying therapies well into their 80s. So I hope that answers your question, Janice. Is there another?
Kay asks, what about HRT?
Hormone replacement therapy. Again, hormone replacement therapy is looked at in particularly younger people as ways to mitigate or improve some of the MS symptoms. You don't really want to be on hormone replacement therapy beyond probably 65 or 65 years of age, or a little older than that, not much older than that, because it really increases your risk many-fold for each year you're on it after that age, for things like breast cancers and uterine and ovarian cancers. So we don't want to tip the scale in that direction either.
For those who do have questions and comments that they don't necessarily want to send to the chat box, you can always use the raise hand feature. If you click your screen and pull up the menu to select more, which is the icon with 3 dots, you can click raise hand and I will unmute you, and you'll get a pop-up on your screen asking if you would like to be unmuted, and then you would allow us to do that so you can speak directly to Cherie. And while we wait for some of our participants to find that feature, we did receive some questions through email. A lady named Martha asks can menopause help change the progression of RRMS to SPMS?
In some people, that appears to be what's happening. However, if menopausal symptoms are difficult, again, hormone replacement therapy may help to stave that off. But again, the progression can be modified a bit by increasing your activity levels, getting better sleep, doing dietary changes, those sorts of things that actually help to improve your sense of well-being.
This is somewhat of a comment and a question. Another email from Betty. She wonders whether or not she should change her primary medication. She says that she had an MRI and her doctor said there was no damage in 5 years, and she just wants to know if, because as time goes by, your body will slightly change. She just wants to know what you would recommend.
I think that's a conversation that you would have to have with someone who really knows you and your course of MS. It needs to happen with your doctor. In this age of social media, we tend to often rely on people with lived experience, like ourselves, people like us. And for the most part, those people with lived experience are not medical professionals and really can't advise us. And also a medical professional that doesn't know you personally in a professional way is not the right person to take information from. So that's a question that's got to go to your doctor. You can certainly say, Betty, you can certainly say that when you go into your doctor, there hasn't been any change in 5 years. Do I still need this level of medication? If not, what would you suggest?
Jill asks which sweetener is best for MS.
I don't use any, but that, you know, I stopped all sugars, all sweeteners, probably 15 years ago. But I think something natural like stevia is probably a little better than Equal or something like that. Splenda, again, it's sort of a hybrid, but the natural sweeteners like stevia are probably safer and may be less inflammation causing. I would recommend that if you really need a sweetener, that you do something like honey or maple syrup in your foods rather than white sugar. White sugar it's really inflammation causing.
Karen asks what drug you are on. She says she's curious about that.
For the last 4 years, I've been on Rituxan, which is essentially biologically very, very similar to Ocrevus. It's a twice-a-year infusion. Probably the easiest drug in the last 20 years that I've been on. Although, you know, in this age of COVID, if you're going to be out and about, if you're an essential worker, it may potentially put you at greater risk for a worse course of COVID should you get it. And yet, the people that I know that are on Ocrevus and Rituxan that have gotten COVID have had a fairly mild course. So, you know, theoretically, it might make it worse. But my rescue drug years ago was Rebif, and I used that very, very safely and effectively for years until it dampened my immune system or modified my immune system to the point where I was getting urinary tract infections all the time that weren't clearing up and staying gone. Mm-hmm. So I came off of a disease-modifying therapy for a while as a result of that, and that's when relapses kind of got out of control.
Rita asks, what's the name of the aging test again? She missed it.
It's called biological age. So if you go on Google and type in biological-age.com, it will bring up a 2-minute survey for you. You just click on a link. It says, check your biological age, I think, but it's biological-age.com.
Casey, I don't see anything from Melanie. I'm sorry.
Okay, I found it. It says, in the case of Medicare Part D, the disease-modifying copay situation, did you also have a regular insurance policy such as Blue Shield or Kaiser, etc.?
I did not. When I went to Medicare, it was Medicare Part D. My husband and I have both been self-employed for decades. And so we didn't get insurance through an employer that could cover that and add on to that as well. So my husband continued to purchase regular insurance, which is why our policy costs so much as self-employed individuals. But no, on Medicare, all I have is the Part A, which is free, covers hospitalization. Part B, which costs about $135 a month and pays 80% of your labs and imaging, doctor's visits, durable medical equipment. I have a supplemental policy, which can be known also as a Part C or Advantage plan, and that picks up the 20% that's not covered by Part B. And then Part D covers medications, and the medications are in tiers so that the most commonly used, less expensive medicines are in tiers 1 to 2. All of our disease-modifying therapies are in tier 5. And most of them, all of them that are self-administered, have very, very high copays with Medicare, generally between $2,000 and $3,500 per month. However, those that are not self-administered, like the infusions, Rituxan, Ocrevus, Lemtrada, Tysabri, all of those are done in an infusion center, so they are picked up by your Part B Medicare.
Casey asks, how do you find out about the programs that help with copays?
If you're on a particular medication, say, for example, you're on Rebif, you call Serono, call MS Lifelines, let them know that you can't afford the copays. Obviously, if you're on Medicare, they're not going to be able to help you with your copays, but they're very, very good at looking at what foundations have monies available and connecting you with those. Your doctor's office can also generally look for those funds for you. If they feel that you're on the drug that you should be on and they want you to stay on it, they're going to do everything they can to keep you on it.
We have another question from Kay. She asks, which vitamins or supplements do you take and or recommend?
Vitamin D, my levels of vitamin D were around 17, and we like to see them between 50 and 70, if possible. So it took me about 6 years before my levels were where my neurologist wanted to see them. And I started out on, I think, 1,000 units a day, and ultimately worked my way up to 5,000 a day. And at the 5,000, I'm maintaining at right around 65 to 70. My doctor rechecks those levels every 3 to 6 months. Vitamin D is toxic. It is stored in our fat cells, and particularly when we're losing weight, we have the potential of a vitamin D toxicity, which can look like a severe irritable bowel. Many people with irritable bowel that are supplementing, if they got off their supplements, the irritable bowel would calm down. So vitamin D, usually for most people, but make sure that your levels are being checked and you're checking it with your doctor. Some of us also need to supplement B12. B12 levels may be within normal range, and yet maybe you've got more neuropathies or nerve pain than what you're comfortable managing. And sometimes supplementing vitamin B12 can help that. Fish oil is another one. The omegas have a property very similar to the fatty covering of our nerve sheaths or myelin. And it is thought that they help to preserve and protect the myelin. I ended up on fish oil when my triglycerides got very high, and I was seeing primary care at the time who was very much into natural remedies rather than pharmaceuticals. And she recommended that I try fish oil, and literally within 4 weeks, the fish oil that she prescribed for me brought my triglycerides from over 200 down to 80. So it worked very well for me. And when my triglycerides have gone up in the interim, if I just make sure that I'm taking that dose every day, I did increase it from 1,000 milligrams a day up to 2,400 milligrams a day at her recommendation, and that made a real difference for me.
Karen wants to know, she says, so if you're on Ocrevus and they pick that up with Medicare, do you still have the expensive copay?
No, nothing.
Wow.
I will tell you, though, that Ocrevus and Rituxan, although they're very similar drugs, are significantly different in the cost that your insurance pays. Rituxan is about 1/3 the cost of Ocrevus for a course every 6 months. So if you're concerned about those things, you might want to have a discussion with your doctor about, if you haven't started on either medication, but you're considering it, you might want to have a conversation with your doctor about how comfortable they feel with one versus the other. And if they feel that either is acceptable, then if you want to go with a cost-saving medication, then you might do that. I know that Rituxan is used for things other than MS, things like arthritis. So it may kill two birds with one stone for some of the MS population, because arthritis is also relatively common as we age.
Kathy asks if you could repeat the medications that will be picked up by Medicare on Part D.
They would be the infusible medications. So that would be Ocrevus, Rituxan, Lemtrada, and Tysabri, the 4 infusibles.
Melanie has a comment. She says she's genetically B12 deficient and can't absorb B12 through diet or supplement, and she requires monthly injections.
I'm pretty much the same way. I think there are a lot of us that are. The sublingual B12 may be a possibility for some. It's absorbed directly into the bloodstream under the tongue, where the circulation is so rich. And for, where you're getting 1,000 micrograms for every injection, then the sublingual is 5,000 micrograms per day. So you're getting 1,000 every month, or in some cases every week, whereas 5,000 a day brings those levels up in most people sublingually.
And I don't see anything else in the chat, nor do I see a raised hand feature, but we've got about 7 more minutes. Do you have any final comments, Cherie?
I think, although it may be hard when you're sitting where you are right now and feel like things have just piled on top of each other so that you don't have control over this, you're down, and you're down for the count. I think it's very important to realize that even small changes can help you to surface. For me, once I got onto the medication that started to reduce the inflammation in my central nervous system, it was like I was coming up for air. And I had been on other medications before that. They just didn't work well for me, which is it's the beauty about today's current medication environment. We have more than 20 choices right now. When I was diagnosed, there was one, and it had just come on the market. So I just think that we need to be very aware that even as we age, if we've never been on a medication, sometimes trying a medication makes a big difference. I actually had been symptomatic with MS for 25 years before I started my first medication. It didn't help a lot. The next medication did. It helped tremendously. So it may be a trial and error thing. They weren't putting people on medication that had been symptomatic for years when I first was diagnosed, because all of the clinical trials looked at people who'd had MS for 5 to 10 years. And here I was at diagnosis 19 years into symptoms. We need to remind the people that are taking care of us that you're unique, and what may not work for somebody else might work for you, and you deserve a chance.
A few more questions just popped up. Karen asks if B12 she says, is B12 toxic?
B12 is because it's a water soluble vitamin and not a fat soluble like your D, is essentially excreted through the urine. Now, that said, anything that's excreted through the urine has the potential to impact kidney function. I would say you probably want to have your B12 levels checked before you start adding B12 in to supplement. There's probably nothing wrong with taking a B complex every day. It's not necessarily needed. I don't recommend that people spend money on vitamins and supplements that they can get in their food. The optimal way to get your nutrients is through your food.
Mm-hmm. Jill says she's been on Ocrevus for this whole year and wants to know, does the Rituxan wear off early for you? And she says she's due for an infusion in 2 weeks and just had a minor relapse due to it wearing off early.
My last visit with my neurologist, I said to him, I know it's time for my Rituxan because I feel like I'm down a pint. And he chuckled and he said, I'm hearing that a lot. So yeah, I think when we get close to that 6-month mark, that some of us are beginning to feel a little less peppy, more noticing our symptoms. Although those symptoms are generally always there on a low level, we're able to work through them and not have them impact our lives significantly. We still feel that the need for that sometimes. And I know that I've heard people on Tysabri say the same thing, that by the time they hit about week 3.5, they just don't have the oomph. They know that it's time for their infusion. So yeah, it's a pretty common feeling, I think.
Well, that's all the time we have for now. If you missed any part of this conference, it will be available on demand on our MS Focus SoundCloud page, msfocusradio.org, and the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation YouTube channel. Remember to follow MS Focus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for times and access information. Our next Zoom conference will be Tuesday, July 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Katrina Bawden, whose topic is cognition and MS. Our sincere thanks to all attendees for your participation, and especially to Cherie Benz. We thank you for taking the time to prepare and share your information with us today.
Thank you.